So, in this situation, Africa has 30% of the global poor that I have mentioned, 60% of those who are struggling in hunger and malnutrition, and the IPCC, the International Interparliament on Climate Change, predicts that as climate change deepens and impacts on the world, some 250 million Africans, that's a quarter of the African population, will be affected by spreading desertification, changing and unpredictable rainfall patterns, floods in some area, erosion of forests and coasts in other areas, and this will be a major catastrophe for a country which already has the majority of the world's poor. European people will also be affected, and I'm sure that you are studying that and thinking about that. The ILO predicts that under the impact of climate change and the current crises, 30 to 50 million more people are going to be plunged into poverty throughout the world. And as I've mentioned, I have information that this is going to affect Spanish people very severely. Just to sum up, what would we ask and beg and appeal to European people to do in this critical situation? Well, of course, we know that it cannot be business as usual. It cannot be a continuation of the global neoliberal, unregulated, uncontrolled, overproducing, overconsuming system that has brought the world to this crisis. And when the G20 leaders meet tomorrow in London, they are going to talk about reviving production and stimulating consumption further. But there cannot be a return to those patterns of overproduction and overconsumption, and depletion of the world's resources and spoliation of the world's waters and so on. So we have to be conscious that we are facing an epochal crisis facing the whole world. And while Europeans are very entitled to struggle, to save their jobs and to defend their services and their political rights, we also are very conscious that there is potential in Europe, and we see this in various European countries, for working people to turn against each other and to blame each other because they are the most immediate people that they can see. And of course we are very aware of the fact that in Europe there are many millions of African migrants who have left Africa in desperation, as we have heard about. So we would be very concerned if there are rabid anti-immigrant and racist sentiments that emerge amongst the people of Europe. But we would also say to the people of Europe, while you have a profound moral and political obligation to support your fellow workers here in Europe, wherever they come from, Latin America or Africa or Asia, you must also recognize the forces that are impelling these vast numbers of Africans to flee from their own countries and their own communities in desperation. In other words, we have to solve the problems in Africa that are also contributed by and created by European companies and European governments. Okay. So what would we say? 5 appeals. There must be unconditional cancellation of Africa's debt. If governments can cancel the financial crises and sins of banks, they can cancel Africa's debt. We would appeal to all Europeans to join us to stop the EPAs and to stop what is called the Global Europe Offensive that is being driven from Brussels. We would ask that Europeans are conscious of the fact of how European companies are sucking wealth out of Africa and into their own coffers. Above all, we would say that Europeans have a profound obligation to take on board the role of their governments and transnational corporations that are not only acting against their interests in Europe, but are being profoundly exploitative and damaging to our peoples, our environment, and our economies in Africa. There are many other matters that we can discuss, and I hope we will, about how we're going to combat the global warming and the environmental and ecological and climatic crisis we are going to face. And there are no easy solutions, But what we look for is partnership and solidarity and cooperation between the peoples of Africa and of Europe and other parts of the world. Thank you.